Welcome to the Strong, Single and Human podcast, a real look at single parenting, how to navigate the ups and downs of life with kids on your own while keeping sane. We cover all manner of subjects from domestic violence, dealing with childhood trauma, through to fussy eaters and how to help your kids become resilient. I'm your host, Claire Martin. Welcome. This week's guest is a lawyer who is now a full-time divorce coach, parenting coordinator, author and mother who supports single parents to do better for themselves and their children with co-parenting skills. She has an approach that combines logical reasoning with empathy and compromise to achieve successful results in conflict resolution. Cherie believes that each decision made during a divorce should be carefully analysed for its long-term consequences, especially when children are involved, and that a divorce coach can help provide an objective perspective. Cherie is convinced that acting as one's best self is the best way to serve the best interests of children during a divorce, inspiring flexibility and resilience in them. As part of a blended family with 4 children of her own and 1 from her partner, Cherie understands the challenges and rewards of navigating complex family dynamics. Along with her work with Dear Divorce Coach, Cherie also offers parent coordination and coaching sessions for individuals and couples going through divorce or other life transitions. This is the Strong, Single and Human podcast. Hi, Cherie Morris. Welcome to the podcast.
Claire, thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here today.
No, thank you. Thank you. Look, I think for every single parent, the subject that we're going to be talking about, which is divorce, is a very emotional subject and very close to everyone's hearts, right? Because if you're a single parent, you've gone through some kind of divorce, whether it be the legal kind of annulling a marriage or divorcing and separating from your ex-partner. And sometimes that divorce can be pleasurable is not maybe the word I want to use there, but sometimes it can be easy and it can be amicable and both of you can grow from it and all of that. And other times it can be toxic, horrendous, create PTSD and all of the various different other things that occur emotionally from divorcing from somebody who you thought you were going to spend the rest of your life with, basically.
Oh, that's so correct. That's so right. And sometimes it's a mix of all those things. You think something's going well and it goes off the rails, and the thing you thought you had under control isn't, and the thing you thought wouldn't work does. So it's very complex. There are lots of moving parts, and it's not something people do, fortunately, a lot. Yeah. So if you don't do it, you may not know the best practices for doing it.
No. And we're human beings, right? So we're a mishmash, a boiling pot of emotional ups and downs, turmoil, trauma, all of that, all rolled into this divorce, right? So look, tell us a little bit about you and how you actually became a divorce coach, because it's not like you could have been a coach for anything, right? Coach for anything, but you decided divorce was your game. The worst thing, like the worst emotional turmoil situation, and you went, no, I'm going to dive straight in and sort this out for people. So how and why?
So as so many things in our lives, Claire, I never imagined this would be my profession. I practiced law in a number of areas for a very long time. And it was only when I went through my own divorce, which had all those pieces I mentioned, the good, the bad, the toxic, the okay, the what's going on, that I recognized the most important parts of divorce have very little to do with the legal system. They have to do with emotional regulation, the cooperation of a former partner, the ability of kids to be resilient because we give them those skills. And what I noticed is in my ring of professionals, I had a really good lawyer, a really good financial advisor, even a good therapist, but there was no one like me, a divorce coach. And this was back in the days before we really were known well. Someone who stands beside you, is an objective thinking partner, will be your practical guide, who's available when you need it, before or when something escalates. And so I said in that moment, I'm going to do some additional certification as a lawyer to become someone who's expert on child issues, on co-parenting issues, on coaching, so that I can support these people. And it felt like it brought all the threads of my lawyering, which involved a lot of mediation, to the fore. So there's no profession better built for me. And it's really coaching for resilience and coaching for adaptation and coaching for dealing with difficult people.
Wow. Wow. And so what does a divorce coach do, right? Because you're not, although you are a lawyer, right? You're not a lawyer as such, which I know is an oxymoron, right? But but that's not what a divorce coach is a lawyer.
That's right. I feel personally that the credential as a lawyer is really important. I don't think you have to be a lawyer to be a divorce coach. Let me preface that. There are good therapists who are divorce coaches. There are people in other professions who come to coaching. Do I think it's enough to be divorced to be a divorce coach? No, I don't. But what a divorce coach does with credentialing, with certification, is stand by your side, knows what the process of divorce is, knows what the escalation points will be, and can be your guide to legal resources, financial resources, therapeutic resources. But also when something happens, they're going to be there in that moment. In my professional opinion, this is critical. You have to be available to the client. You need to be able to help them talk themselves off the ledge. You can't talk them off the ledge, right? They have to learn and gain tools for emotional self-regulation. So much of our culture is still about fault in divorce. Well, whose fault was it? Who's ruining the kids' lives? Is it you? Is it him? Is it her? Is it them? And we internalize that, right? Our chatter is all about whose fault it is, when in fact, what we should be doing is taking care of ourselves, taking care of our kids. So a divorce coach, in a very long-winded way to answer your question, is there to be your guide to all things divorce, to make sure you have the resources you need, but most impactfully to help you take care of yourself and your kids throughout every step of the process.
It's emotional, right? You're dealing with a lot of hurt and emotion, and basically if you've not worked through that, and look, the divorce could be a shock to you, right? You may not have seen it coming, right? And so then you're dealing with your processing while you're dealing with and going through those 7 emotions of separation, grieving, and all of those things that comes with losing someone in your life, right? And that's basically, I mean, it's not a death because it's not final, right? And I'm sure there are some single parents out there that would potentially wish that they never saw that. I'm not going to say that their ex-partner was gone from this earth, but that they never saw them again, right? But you've got a divorce coach, from my interpretation as a single parent, I mean, you gave a great description, is somebody there to go, whoa, hang on a minute, step back, take a deep breath. Now let's actually understand what the situation is, instead of, and getting you to stop, right? Change your state, get you to think about things. Am I right?
It's true. You are so right. And what a better way of saying it in a short version, Claire. And I think one of the things that's most important, because you mentioned this idea of being surprised by divorce. And what I noticed when I work with people who are the unhappy party from whom a divorce is going to happen, whether they want it or not. Once we dig a little deeper, they knew there were problems. And perhaps they were avoidant of those problems, as many of us are. So the work we do, in addition to practical resources, is to a deeper dive into who they are, to interrupting thought patterns about self, about negative thinking, about what you said, what is actually happening here, so that they can move through divorce with grace and without self-sabotage. Because if you tend to be a person who's avoidant, who doesn't want to deal with problems in the marriage, you might be a person who doesn't want to deal with divorce, but that can be a great disadvantage.
Right. So let's unpack that, right? Why? Because I'm sitting here going, if you didn't want to deal with divorce, right, does that mean that you don't have the emotional triggers that maybe a divorce would normally have? But you're saying, oh, no, that's a disadvantage.
It can absolutely be a practical disadvantage. So, for example, if your husband comes to you and says, I want a divorce, and you say, well, I don't want one, and he already has a lawyer and you're not doing anything about getting one, and you don't know what you should be asking for and where your kids will live, then you bury your head in the sand. He could negotiate you right out of the house, right? And it may be the house has to be sold or some other, pattern interrupted, but avoiding what has to happen and the challenges you can face can be a great disadvantage to you. So when I have, in particular, women who don't want a divorce and who are avoidant in dealing with it, I really encourage them to do a deeper dive in our coaching work about what's going on for them. Yeah. Often, again, they identify real problems in the marriage and their own unhappiness, Claire, which is so fascinating, right? They don't want a divorce, but they're deeply unhappy. And once we can unpack that and get to the other side of what's going on, there's really a great liberation, a great, how can I now get to my best self, negotiate fairly, not with spite and anger, but with a sense of fairness, which means standing up for yourself. Then you can do that even without going to court, in my experience. But it does require time. It's not going to happen overnight. So it's really important to start that work early.
And sometimes, right, within a divorce, you don't have months and months. It is pretty, like, if somebody's wanting a divorce quickly, right, then like you could be railroaded. And it's not, and I want to make it very clear, right, because I know there are two camps in this, like camps where people go, you need to go and get what you deserve, right, and get everything that you can out of that man or that woman or whatever that's hurt you, right? But that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is a fair, equal separation, right? And to actually understand what each party has given to the marriage, right? And to attempt to break up in a equal fashion is maybe what I would want to say. Equal and not passive. Passive is a wrong word, but peaceful. It's maybe the word I'm trying to find. It's a
lovely word. And equitable is a great word, because equal, connotes there's 50 here and 50 here, and it's not always equal, but maybe something's more important to you, something's more important to him. If you get stuck in equal, you may lose that, right?
Yes, no, I agree, because negotiation is really around understanding what the other party wants, maybe first, and then what you're willing to give up to enable you to get to some place. And it could be like 55-45, who knows? But if it means that everyone is happy, we all move forward with our lives, divorce is going to happen, like you can't fight it to say, I don't want this to happen, so I'm going to be a pain, right? Because it's going to happen.
And the law can be the outside boundary for that. So you can get good legal advice. Here's what's likely to happen if you go to court. I can tell you in most instances, and I know we can talk about going to court, but when you don't have to, you don't want a judge to decide, a judge that doesn't know you, your children, your circumstances. So the last thing you want is to spend resources to have an annoyed, harried, person sit on the bench and tell you that you're badly behaved and so is your spouse, and that you're not doing the right things for your children, and so here's what's going to happen. It's the worst possible outcome, and it happens a lot, right? More than we would want. And so staying within the container of, I can live with this. I want to negotiate. I do want to self-advocate, and I will get good advice, but I can negotiate. And I'm not going to negotiate because I'm mad at you, because that's not the place of good negotiation. It's not good for you. It's not good for your kids.
And I do feel like the court system does need to be looked at 110%. However, I feel for these judges, right? They sit and listen to divorce case over divorce case over divorce case over divorce case. I'm surprised that they don't like go home, have a massive glass of wine, and then go and talk to their therapist, right? Because I'm like, geez, like, sometimes I sit there and go, what a depressing job to have, because it's not as though they're dealing with happiness and great, like, fantastic situations. They're sitting there residing over some really horrible, sticky situations. And they may have only met you for the first time in court. So how do they know who you are, what your life is outside of court, and how good a mum you are, how good a dad you are, or whatever? Like, it's all about that court performance as such. And I hate to call it performance, but it is a performance.
And you're asked to bring experts to testify about your parenting or your assets. And again, these are outsiders who don't really know the interior of your life and its working. So you're much better served to avoid that and do it yourself. There's that classic case, I think it's reflected in a recent film, where the judge is presiding over a couple splitting up their Beanie Baby collection. Now, it's not children, but when you think about a court's time and resources and two grown-up people not being able to do that. And yes, this was at a time Beanie Babies had value, but come on, it's not worth their money and their resources. So this is a sign for me of the emotional dysregulation. They can't get beyond it to cope with a very simple matter.
No Beanie Baby is worth paying a lawyer $1,000 an hour or whatever to actually, there are some Beanie Babies out there worth a lot of money, but good God, give it up.
Figure it out yourself.
Yes.
You get one. I came to a place, and I see it for people where they won't shift. And part of it is the lens through which you're observing, right? And we all can get stuck in that, Claire. I put myself in that category. I can get triggered by a situation and only see my perspective. And that's what it is, a perspective, right?
Yeah.
So getting good advice, good coaching can really help. Well, have you thought about this? And maybe you then can take some time, not with your spouse or former spouse or co-parent, but with somebody who's your advocate, who's on your side, your team, that is validating and hearing you, to say, hey, maybe you want to take a step back from that and think about this a little differently.
Yeah. I once knew somebody who spent $50,000, Australian dollars, on fighting through the courts about a cat being in the house when their children were in the house. And I'm like, you could have spent that $50,000 on your kids.
This to me is not surprising, sadly. And I think it becomes an issue of control, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the big lessons I work with clients about, and that all of us can self-reflect upon if we are divorced, is what can we control and what can't we, especially if you're co-parenting. And letting go of their parenting time is extraordinarily difficult if you have shared parenting time. And it's one of the best things you can do. If you have a cooperative co-parent, great. And when you don't, and it's safe for them to be with their co-parent, then you have to let go if they're eating their broccoli, if they're eating cereal for breakfast, if they're getting up just before school. Like, all of these things, to some extent, are things you must let go. And it's one of the hardest things, especially if you've been the primary parent. But a court in general, except where health, safety, welfare of the child comes into play, will not want to hear about these things, right?
Yeah. And it's quite funny because my ex's argument is, you won't let me see my son, right? And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy for you to see your son. I want a break. I don't understand where these people think that their ex-partners are going, oh, no, 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 I'm keeping the children to myself, right? Blah, blah. It's about the health of the child, right? And the safety of the child, right?
This is it.
I'm more than happy for my child to go with my ex-partner for the whole weekend. It means I can let loose. I can do
The
what I
best
want.
part of
I can stay in
separation and
bed.
divorce.
Exactly.
It's and I know newly divorced people who aren't with their kids
I
100% of the
know.
time won't understand that, but we know it. We
Yeah.
want it. But if it's not safe or not possible, that's a whole separate category.
Yeah. Oh,
And you know when
exactly.
that exists, Claire. You
Exactly.
know it.
Exactly. But, you do sit there and go, no, I'm definitely not stopping you. You're the one stopping you from seeing your kids. Don't even go there. Right. So it's changing perspective. Right. And it's
Yes.
saying, you can see your child, right? Maybe you can't see your child overnight, but it's changing that perspective and going, give me some time off. And I agree with you, right? Newly separated people, you do, and I've been through it where I cried when my son has left me because I've gone, I miss him so much. But you fill your life with other things when the kids aren't around. Fill your life with the things that you wouldn't be able to do if you had the children with you 24/7. Believe you me, from a mum who has a child with her 24/7, there are lots of things that I wish, and I am so jealous of. I love my son, believe you me, but I'm so jealous of these people who get time off. So,
Well, and one thing I see people who are deciding whether to stay or go, and one of the
yeah,
big barriers to success can be when we become over involved with our children. So I just wanted to touch on it because
yeah.
what you said reminded me of that point. spouses are about you've over devoted yourself to the children. You don't devote enough time to me. And this is moms and dads, by the way. So thinking about barriers to success can look like, what are you doing for yourself when you can? Because it's so important, right? Whether you're in a relationship or not, to make sure you're not over involved with your kids' lives to avoid intimacy in whatever relationships you have.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. So you've had so much experience in this. How do you survive a separation or a divorce, right? What tips have you got to keep yourself sane, emotionally level? And look, we're human beings, right? So we are going to get a little bit emotional. Well, not a little bit emotional. We're going to get a lot emotional, right? A lot, right? Let's put it out there, right? We will get a lot emotional, right? Now, whether you show that emotion or not is up to you. Me, I'm an open book, right? Like somebody comes and sees me, they'll know that I'm emotional, right? But it's how you deal with that. So how do we survive? How do we deal with it?
I think one important thing to know is that you will not feel yourself for a period of time. So acknowledging it, recognizing your fragility, making sure to the extent you have control, you take yourself out of situations that will trigger you. So for example, friends and family are a great example of what can send you off the rails, right? They may ask questions, make inquiries, make judgments that are not supportive of you, or even if they intend to be, may not be. What happened? Why did he leave? Why did she do that? What are you doing about the children? Who's taking care of them? So making sure that to the extent you can set boundaries with people who are already in your life, even those with good intentions, is incredibly important. So boundaries is like step number one. I'm going to talk about this now, or I'm not going to talk about it now. Hey, I feel like what you're saying isn't really supportive of where I am, so maybe we cannot talk about that now. It's okay to do that. You're allowed to be boundaried and perceived to be a little bit difficult to allow people to know that you're having a tough time, which is really hard for women in particular, I think.
And I think if I'm the other side of the fence, right? If you're dealing with somebody who is going through a divorce, a separation or whatever, right? It's about being cognizant and saying, can I give you some advice? And if they say, no, I'm good, the lawyers are dealing with it or whatever, then that's fine, okay? Just deal with that, okay? Or just saying, look, this is, you can go, this is only my opinion, but like, if you don't want to hear it, then that's fine, right? Actually ask them, do you want my advice or not, right? Because how can I help you is another good one.
Claire.
I use it with my son, right? I used it with my son last night, right? How can I help you? And he went, you can't, Mum. So I went, okay. If you need me, you know where I am, right? Just come and ask me. But it's how can I help you? And they may say, oh, well, look, you can't, or oh, I'll phone you if I need you. And that's fine, right? And keep asking, how can I help you? What can I do to make this easier for you? Is there anything? And if they go, nah, then just keep asking, right? Because I'm also conscious that sometimes, and especially with men, their emotional connection is with the woman in their life. And when that woman goes, I want a divorce, everything goes pear-shaped, right? And then there are times, I've never had them, but there are times where if it's the man looking after the children, or if they're on their own, right, there are several dark and horrible, nasty thoughts that might encroach in their mind, and they might think, oh, everyone will be better off without me, right? That's a big fat no. But those sort of things, just keep checking in.
So well said. And I love that you mentioned men in this equation, because I work with men as well as women. And you're so right, because the traditional role has been, right, the woman is the primary caretaker. Even if he wants to fully participate, he may not have the tools, the skills, if he's been focused on something else. So just showing up for that friend, could I bring you a casserole, right? Yeah. What do you need from me today as your friend? Do you want to talk about it? Can I tell you how hard it was for me? Whatever it is, but yes, that what can I do to show up for you, and making them acknowledged and important is probably the best tip. And that's whether you have a coach or not, right? This is just if you are the person in the life of someone going through divorce. So I really appreciate the ways you can show up differently for men and women, and sometimes it's the same.
Yeah. And understand that, oh, you need to get the car, or, oh, you need to go and get half his super, or, oh, you need to do this, or, oh, don't let him leave you doing X, Y, and Z. That's all great advice, but adds pressure to the situation that's going on, right? And as a person external, right, that may not be the case, right? What advice you're giving about, oh, don't let him just give you X, Y, and Z money or whatever, right? It's adding pressure, right? Stop adding pressure to the person who's going through the divorce situation. They need to survive.
So in addition to boundaries as the person going through divorce, and, meeting the friends who are showing up for you where they are and asking for what you need, I think self-care is extremely important.
Yeah.
Honestly, Claire, no one else except you is actually going through this, right? In your situation. So if you're not putting yourself top of the list as you care for a child or children, no one else is really going to do it. So it means you really have to prioritize that. It's not extra. It's not optional. It's number one. So even as you work, even as you care for the children, make sure you're taking that bath or getting that massage, spending what resources you have to prioritize what's important to you. It may be going for a walk with a friend and talking, or saying, let's not talk. I'm going to listen to a podcast and I'm going to walk, or I'm going to exercise in some way, because that's what supports mental health in my experience as I work with clients.
I completely agree with you. And coming from me, somebody who tried so desperately hard to not have any effect on my son's life, so suppress emotionally everything I was going through, suppressed work stresses, tried to hold it together, I think is the word I would like to use to describe it. Hold it together led to me getting an irregular heartbeat. I'm sure there were other factors that led to it, but I believe that my separation, all of the stresses, not having a family around me at the time, having to deal with it on my own, work stresses, blah, 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 led to me getting an irregular heartbeat, having to have heart surgery, et cetera, because if we go down to the nuts and bolts of it, the heart is where the emotion is, right? Everything emotional has a heart on it, right? When you love somebody, it's a heart, right? And all of that. And so therefore, suppressing all of that emotions, not looking after yourself, trying to hold it together, just affects your body so much that you don't realize. And those stresses come out a year later or whatever, 2 years later.
There's so much now, but as we age, we notice, right, the physical ailments and the ways they're connected to our emotions. And so paying attention to that when something's not working, know that if you suppress it, it's going to come out another way. So I think that's a beautiful analogy with the heart. It's so
And
true.
I was 46. I was 46. 46 people. Like, I'm not 52 now, so don't go there. But like, I wasn't 65, right? At 46, I'm sitting in hospital on an operating table going, I'm 46. This shouldn't be happening to me. I should be like 65 or 75 or whatever.
Yes.
I'm 46. Like,
it's true.
Middle-aged.
And that, to me, if people are listening to this, please take heed. Notice what's going on in your body. Pay attention, because it will come out. And as you said, you were not expressing anything, and that is harmful to the psyche, to the body. And figuring out a safe space to do it. Yes, you don't want to. Obviously, the reason you didn't want to overwhelm your son is obvious. You were a good mother.
He was too.
And you needed a place to be able to express that and to be able to process when you weren't caring for him. So it all makes sense. And so finding that space for self-care is probably, and boundaries with people, so important. And then we'll make sure we'll make sure that you're getting good advice, right? That you have professionals in your life so that you can categorize it. It can't become your everything, in my opinion. Yes, it's going to bleed into your work for a period of time, your personal relationships for a period of time. But if you know you're getting good advice, you're not going to need to ask everybody what they think you should do, right?
No, I agree.
And so finding the right professionals to do that, to have a safe place to fall, to have good boundaries and do self-care is really everything, I think, as you go through divorce.
And let's face it, right? At the end of the day, you need to be there for your children, right? So if you don't maintain and keep aware of your own mental state and looking after yourself, right, then you're not going to be there. Like, I spoke to my cardiologist and said, wow, I had no symptoms whatsoever, right? And said to her, what would have happened? She said, well, in 18 months' time, you would have had a stroke, had a heart attack, or whatever, if you hadn't have picked it up. You probably would have had symptoms, but yeah. So people, honestly, listen to yourself, right? And I will say, right, I know, like you've said, one of the examples of self-help, you know, go for a walk, do whatever. I know as a single parent, if you've got the children 100% of the time, you can't do that, right? But there are plenty of YouTube videos, free apps, whatever, that you can just sit on your floor in the lounge, right? While the kids are watching telly and just run through a few exercises. Just go out in the back garden, whatever, go on your balcony if you're in an apartment, right? And just do some sit-ups, do some, like, I don't know, squats or whatever. Beautiful. And just try and get 5 minutes. Or do it when the kids are asleep at night or first thing in the morning.
And think about it. I'm so glad you mentioned the children, because what are you role modeling to them, right? As you separate and divorce. Ultimately, you know how our children are. They pay attention to everything we do, not everything we say, which means we see our behaviors exhibited in their behaviors. And sometimes it's shocking and upsetting, I think, for every mother and father. It must be true. But when you're going through divorce, we want to teach them that this is maybe a transition we didn't want, or even if we did, but we're coping, we're the adult. We're going to show you that we can be okay. Because if we teach them we can't be okay, that's problematic, right, for them. And so the ultimate role model to our children must accept self-care, because if you don't, then you won't be able to do what you want. And if your highest purpose is your children, as for so many of us it is, right, even as we create and carve out separate lives, then really you're doing them a great service by demonstrating to them that you take care of yourself, because you want them to do that for themselves ultimately.
No, that's right. That's right. Yeah, they need to be resilient going forward.
That's the key word, I think, in divorce is resilience. If you can, whatever your life looks like walking forward, whether you feel in the end you had equity, whether you had fairness, whether you got everything you wanted or very little of it, can you build back to develop a life that's fulfilling? I'm not saying it's right or fair. I'm saying you may not have a choice in the end. We're going to do the best we can. And then what's next? And how are you going to shape your perspective, your mindset?
And I think, I know you've said what's right, it may not be right, it may not be fair, but my advice is don't focus on those things, right? Focus on what is right in your life, what is, what is positives, right? Because there are so many times where I've been angry and annoyed and just frustrated with where I sit, right? And it's my blueprint in my head of how I thought my life was going to be, right? My life ain't nothing like my blueprint, right? Nothing at all. But then I don't think anyone says, right? And therefore it's about going, well, okay, what is right in my life? And how do I change what's in my life at the moment to get the blueprint I want, right? And going forward like that. That's the only way you can do it. Because if you can focus on the negatives, you're just going to want to jump off the ledge, not stay on the ledge and like get talked down from it. So, okay, boundaries, self-love or self-care, should we say? Self-love, self-care. So anything else? How do you keep check of emotions?
So I think there's work to be done there. And part of it is just what you touched upon, which is how you view what's going to be next for you. And having that self-care may require therapy. You may need to do a deeper dive into what happened before, even before marriage, to understand why you find yourself where you are now. I believe coaching is really good starting now and looking forward. How are we going to build on success? How are we going to build forward? But sometimes it's necessary to do that deeper dive into your relationship with your parents and your siblings and where you've been historically, because maybe where you are now is based on where you were, and how do you create a new pattern? So I think it's important to consider therapeutic help when needed. I think coaching is great because we're going to build a plan going forward. So all of these components can be necessary. And then there's this piece, Claire, which we haven't made explicit, but many of us can be victims, right? In situations, we have a partner who drinks too much or, treats us badly, even abusively, and maybe the children too, like terrible scenarios. And the first thing is safety, of course, right? Get safe, keep the kids safe. But then how do we shape our future, not based on the perspective for the rest of our lives and our children's lives that we are victims in everything else that happens? And that's really hard. And it's not always fair or always right, but it's really good for us and for our kids. So we have to have, and I called it self-care and you called it self-love. And I really love self-love. I love your words, because if we don't love ourselves, we may always believe that we're the victim, and a little bit maybe even deserve to be the victim. And that's not true, right? No. But no one can change your thoughts, your feelings, except for you. I saw a great TikTok recently. Now I'm going to admit that I watched TikTok.
Oh my God.
That no one can change for you. You will be presented with 1,000 situations. And you will bring your own emotional regulation to those situations. So it's not up to the world to change. It's up to you to change how you cope with what happens. And that's not to say it's easy. And it's not to say that you haven't had a history that was really hard and that does trigger these things. But it is to say that it is up to you to now figure out how to move through the world in a way so that these triggers for you can be shifted.
Yeah.
And that's the way to a successful future.
No one's coming to rescue you, right? Nobody is. I know, right? It would be great if we had that dude on a white horse coming along saying, hey, it's all good. Don't worry. I'm going to take this all away. Here's $1 million. Here's a house. Here's a car. Here's the happy life. Here's your private jet. But even that, right? And let's face it, there are people who have all of that who still aren't bloody happy. I know. So like nobody's going to come and save you. And you need to stand up for you. And sometimes, and God love him, a really good friend of mine who I lost, 10 years ago now, has always said to me, do nothing. First of all, your first step that you should do is do nothing, right? Do it for 24 hours. Don't send that text. Don't make that phone call. Don't comment. Don't just do nothing, right? Take a deep breath, do nothing, sit in it, sit in whatever you need to sit in, whether it be panic, anxiety,
rage,
anything, right? Rage. Oh, yeah. Go get a punch bag. My advice, get a punch bag, put it in your garage. It's the best thing I've ever done doing a separation. I'm not sure it did any good for my heart, but yeah.
But rage is a good thing because it is expressing sort of how we feel as long as it's properly channeled. You're right. And that advice is some of the best in separation and also in co-parenting. Don't be reactive. So it's sort of the first rule of thumb I use. You may feel a particular way, and that's absolutely okay. But how you're going to behave is different than how you're going to react.
Definitely. And emotions are a fire, right? To my mind, it is a massive, great big burning fire that's out of control. And coming from Australia, right? We have fires, bushfires here all the time, right? But it is a big fire that's out of control. don't add fuel to it by continuing a conversation and I suppose it's the same within a divorce, right? Step away from it. Do nothing. Step away. Have a think about what's actually, if there's an emotion that's come up in you, step away. Have a think about that emotion and why that's been triggered, how it's been triggered, and how you're going to deal with it. But step away from it.
And dare I add to that, Claire, what's your role in it? And by that, I don't mean you, Claire, because we know you probably have right.
I have probably had a lot of roles and a lot of emotional fires,
but my point
it's
is,
all good.
We all play a role. I play a role, right? Your sense of being right, of having control, of not being able to let go, of wanting to be in charge. We all show up in these ways, again, based on our familial history, based on our relationships with people in the world. So you're so right to say, step back, reflect. Don't react. You can respond and take some time before you do it. It's the best practice of all. Don't continue not to show up, right? You got to then dip your toe back in, but make sure the response is based not on your emotion of the moment, but a response that makes sense for you and your kids.
But one question that's burning for me, maybe because I'm female, right? But within, and you've dealt with both sides of the fence, right? Male and female within the divorce situation. Do different things affect females as opposed to men? Like, are there different things that we need to be aware of as a female? And the men that are listening to this, do they need to be aware of other things that might happen?
That is a great and tricky question, right? And I will say this, because I work with individuals who are men and women, and then I also work with couples and do co-parenting work and negotiation work. What I find is, depending on your role in the marriage, you may try to lean into another role that you haven't traditionally had, and then feel slightly out of control and inept and underprepared. Like when you were talking about the man trying to, take on the caretaking role. It can be the same, for example, with women and finances. And what I will say is it can also be switched. I don't mean to gender stereotype, but I will say we still have many patterns, right? And I still see those patterns. So what I say to people is, whatever it is you don't feel competent about, get education for, lean into that, but don't do that work in front of your spouse. In other words, get competent, don't get reactive, because a lot of times what I see is men and women get mad at each other for what they perceive to be their own inadequacy. But rather than educating themselves, learning how to do it better, or feeling that they do it better, even maybe they've been doing it well, they get defensive and reactive, which shows up badly. So if you're going into a negotiation, if you don't feel conversant with your finances, find education about that. If you don't feel conversant about caretaking your children, get educated about that. So get the tools so that when you show up, you can simply state what you're doing to solve the problem rather than blame the other, and sort of shift that feeling of inadequacy and project that onto your spouse. So there certainly aren't firm categories for what men and women do differently, but I will say, whatever you feel less competent about can become a liability as you go through separation.
Okay. And let's face it, we're in the era of information, right? Like, it's not that you can't go out there and do a Google search.
Oh my goodness. And there are tons of people that are now financial professionals who will educate you. There are therapeutic professionals, there are parenting professionals, there are divorce coaches, right? We do this work so that you can do better for yourself and your family system. And you still are a family system, right? If you have children with someone.
Oh, exactly. Like, it doesn't, I wish it sometimes did, but it doesn't just finish, right? It's like you have to share those responsibilities and go from there. So, divorce and courts, right? So is there anything, so we've done boundaries, do the self-love malarkey, get educated on the areas potentially that you need help on, finances, if if you haven't dealt with the finances within the relationship and you need help with that. But then, like, court, right? Going to court to deal with this all out. So over here in Australia, and I'm not sure if it's the same in the States, UK, Europe as such, but over here you have to go to mediation first, and you have to go through the mediation process unless there are situations like addiction, domestic violence, etc., which means that mediation is just not worth. It's not worth you going and going to mediation, and then you would go straight to court. And then if mediation doesn't work and there are disagreements there, then it then goes up to the next level, which is court, and it then means that the things that can't get mediated are then decided in a court of law by a judge who doesn't really know you guys. So. So, I don't know if that's the same situation over in the States, right? But so if you can't decide on certain things, maybe access to the children, right, which seems to be number one, or finances, they're the two biggies, right? But and you're going to court, what do you need to do to prepare yourself? Like as a divorce coach, how would you help somebody prepare for court? Because I've only ever been once.
It's a big one, and it's the least desirable outcome. We've already suggested that, but in the States, in various jurisdictions around the world, it's jurisdictionally appropriate. So they may require mediation, they may not. But let's assume you've done that or you haven't, depending on where you live, and now you're faced with the option of court. When you have to do it, it generally happens that you have someone on the other side, it shouldn't be you, that won't negotiate. So first I want to say, make sure you're not the one that won't negotiate to come to some reasonable conclusion, like child access. If your jurisdiction says the rule of law is likely each parent gets, physical custody 50% of the time, and you're saying absolutely not 0% of the time, and there's no outlying factors of safety, health, and welfare, don't take that extreme position. Okay, so that's the first thing. Just don't be extreme in your negotiating position. But if you find yourself with someone who is, then you may have to go to court. You may not be able to negotiate to success. So what you want to do is make sure you have those experts who can testify on your behalf, that can say this other person is taking an unreasonable position, because courts will not be sympathetic to you just because you show up and tell them that you're a victim of this narcissist, for example. That's not enough. That's the word bantied about, right? All the time. And it may even be true, but what you need is good evidence of what's happened and what extreme position they're taking, if you're going to go to court and have a judge decide your finances or about your children. And that's the bottom line. There are very few cases, substance abuse, domestic violence aside, that people should find themselves in that position. There are so many alternatives to doing that, so many cooperative procedures, but sometimes it's not you, it's truly them. They will not negotiate to reason. And so you have to be as well prepared as you can be, which means an outlay of resources, which is maybe problematic, right?
Yeah. And also, with the evidence side of things, your lawyer would be able to tell you, what evidence is submissible and what isn't submissible, and all of that stuff, right? Because
it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. And this is why it's important to have competent de-escalating legal counsel. Yeah. And this is the tricky part, because if you don't do this every day, you don't know who those legal professionals are. And there are lots of different, as a member of the legal profession myself, I'm, saying it, in all honesty, there are lots of different categories of lawyers, and you want to be careful and be thoughtful. So be prepared when retaining a lawyer in asking good questions. What am I getting for my dollar here? What are you going to do for me? Can you tell me what we need to do to prove this case? And make sure you take that part as seriously as you take going to court.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because finding the right lawyer, let's face it, okay, lawyers are human beings. These are not like superheroes with capes, right? They are human beings like us. They have gone through massive education regarding the law and all of the different scenarios, right? So they know the law and what needs to happen and what doesn't need to happen and how you can deal with situations, right? But they are a party to your situation, but they also have loads of other people as well that they're dealing with as well, right? So just to make it cognizant around, they may not be as emotionally bought into this as you, because they are just trying to win the case for you. But you're going to need to communicate with your lawyer and give them the details that will enable them to help you. You can't just expect them to magic a win out of fresh air, right?
And you don't want them emotionally invested. And in fact, if they are, that can be problematic too. You really want the can you help me prove my case kind of lawyer. And if you get one that's emotionally invested, be careful.
Okay. Yeah, no, definitely. Look, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Cherie, for coming on here and just talking us and walking us through this. If people who are listening to this are interested in getting in contact with you and understanding a little bit more about divorce coaching, what it means, how they can be a divorce coach, they need a divorce coach, all of those sort of things, how do they get in contact with you?
So the simplest way to find me is at my website, deardivorcecoach.com. You can schedule a discovery Zoom session for about 20 minutes. I want to get to know you. You get to know me. If you're a potential client, a discovery Zoom is perfect. If you're another coach or a professional who's interested in being a referral source, schedule a networking session. It's as simple as that. So deardivorcecoach.com. I've got loads of resources that are free for people. There's an advice column. There's books I've participated in writing. There's a blog to talk about advice, that you may need in your divorce, parenting schedules. All of it is right there. Go to my website. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Cool. Brilliant. Okay. So look, I have one final question for you.
Great.
What piece of advice have you been given that you still use today?
Oh, Claire, I really want to reflect upon this, because the best advice I think I was ever given, and, I feel very lucky to have been given a lot of good advice, is a piece of advice given by my father, who was, shall we say, a complicated man. But one piece of very good advice was, don't close doors until you have to. Wow, and then when you must, and when you must, don't look back.
Wow.
And I think it really applies to so much in life, but also to divorce, because we make decisions and we do the best we can with the tools we have at the time. So as we reflect on choices we've made or choices that have been made for us, really look forward, make your perspective forward and your shift toward what's next and best. And that's the best piece of advice I got. And I still live with it today to the best of my ability.
No, that's awesome. Brilliant. Look, thank you again for coming on the podcast. Divorce touches us in so many ways, or separation. I'm separation. I have been divorced, but that was a bit of an easy one because there was no kids or finances to really worry about. Thank you, because it touches us all.
It does. Thank you, Claire. This has been a really thoughtful, provocative conversation, and I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast and you would like to hear more, please hit subscribe wherever you like to hear podcasts. If you would like to support us further, share this episode with your friends and family. And finally, drop us a review on iTunes, as I'd love to hear your thoughts, comments, and ideas. It all helps me to understand and produce awesome content you want to hear just like this. If you want to check out our past episodes, write to us, appear on the podcast, or for links, resources, and show notes, go to our website, www.strongsingleandhuman.com. We are also on all the usual social media platforms, Insta, Facey, and Twitter. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I hope to see you back here again soon. Be kind to yourself, and remember, no one is perfect. We're all just putting one foot in front of the other and doing our best. I'm Claire Martin, and you've been listening to the Strong, Single, and Human podcast.